fundamental reasons that seem to cause employers, whether in the tourist industry or any other industry, to opt for these less than favorable situation. I am not going to try and posit a reason, Mr. President, but I understand that there are some reasons which are offered. We need to look at them. We need to take them into consideration when we are dealing with policy formulation, so that we can get a balance that the employer will still feel in control of his employee, and at the same time the employees will get a greater stability in their employment circumstances. So I understand the issues that arise, but it is not to be looked upon merely at a surface level. The low income is a thing that bothers me, and there are some hotels and villas that the income is quite high. And indeed it is true, as I understand it, that there are parts of the income depending on where you are. Because if you work as internally, cleaning certain rooms and so on, you may not interface with the guests, and therefore you don't get your tips. I've always felt, now that I have to be involved with an agency that has certain attractions, that if I could find a way to collect all the tips and make sure every employee gets it, if I could find a way, he's not going to agree. But if I could, because the lady that cleans the bathroom is just as important to the success of the venture. But that lady doesn't meet up on the tourists, so she doesn't get a tip. And those that meet up on the tourists is likely to be resistant, because it might mean a cut in the tips that they get. So the tips are very sensitive matters. And indeed, you know, if you think you can get information as how tip and how it is collected and how much, it is like pulling teeth. Because I won't get into the reason why that is like pulling teeth. But I've always felt that in certain places, if I had the power, I would make tips be shared with all the employees. But the point is that there are some aspect of the tourist industry that pays salaries that are significant, and the majority of the salaries are low. I am told that part of the reason has to do with the nature of the industry and the nature of the tourists that we attract. I'm no tourist expert. I'm not offering any expertise, but that, I'm told, could be a part of it. I have to bear in mind that even though the industry makes billions of dollars, you have to ask yourself the question, what is the investment and what is the return that is made on that investment? So I do accept that it is an issue that has to be dealt with, but I am always very slow to deal with these type of issues by legislation, because we can pass laws and others do as they wish, and the law is there and we don't have any employees. So I really would like a study, and I'm sure they have done it in these areas, which would inform some of the decision making that flows in with regard to these issues. And the second point is that I noticed, reading the minister, Mr. Bartlett, presentation, that there's a greater emphasis or a continued emphasis on training. So, for example, there's a hospitality and tourism management program that was launched last year in collaboration with the Ministry of Education, etc., for certification for high school students. And it is offered by the American Hotel and Lodging Educational Institute. And I am told that it allows high school students to gain entry-level qualifications for the tourism industry. This, Mr. President, will ensure that they are at a higher level and therefore should be able to demand higher salaries. Then I noticed that there's a center called the Jamaica Center for Tourism Innovation, launched as an avenue to professional certification in the sector. And I'm told it is aimed to identify competent workers in industry who are not yet certified and graduates from tertiary institutions who may have the theoretical knowledge but no practical experience. And the target, I'm told, there is 8,000 tourism workers in the next 5 years. And finally, there's a graduate school of tourism that is to be established in the western campus of the University of the West Indies in very short order to train personnel, even at a higher level, for the industry. The training as management level, as I understand it, but the training and education will equip the workers not only to do better, but to my mind to demand higher salaries. I think Senator Sinclair dealt with the whole question of housing and the work that is being done there, so I won't repeat that. And then I just want to come to 2 points that I want to raise concerning the bill. I understand that pension bill is technical. I understand that. And I appreciate the comments because I did, as in my usual style, write my views to the technical people beforehand, and they have tried to satisfy me, and most of them. But nevertheless, notwithstanding the efforts, I still wish to raise 2 points for consideration. And that first one, I'm sorry, I can't see. The way I raised it, in such a delicate way. It is not going to offend you, Senator Brown. At page 19. At page 19. Page 19. It says at paragraph 31(3), the board shall, upon purchasing an annuity, securing a pension, or upon the payment of a lump sum, require the member or the beneficiary, as the case may be, to duly execute a form of release and discharge, releasing the trustees, their agents, and employees from all actions, accounts, claims, and demands whatsoever arising directly or indirectly under the scheme in relation to the said member or the beneficiary, as the case may be. Now, the way I understand release and discharge, they are granted in circumstances where you get a benefit usually that you did not expect to get or you are not entitled to. So if you get an ex gratia payment, giving a benefit, a release to say, I take this ex gratia payment, it is doubtful. Let's take a motor vehicle accident. There's a motor vehicle accident, there is doubt as to who is responsible for it. So there is no certainty that I would have won if I go to court. Maybe I was driving on the wrong side of the road, but nevertheless, they have decided to come up with a settlement. So I am gaining a benefit, I'm getting certainty as against going to court for an uncertainty. So if I sign a release and give up all my rights against the person who licked me down on the road, that's understandable. In the case of the pension, what the pensioner is getting, male or female, is what she is statutorily entitled to in any event. There's no special consideration for this release. So I collect my benefit, but I have a dispute with the fund. I say you didn't calculate my benefits right. But for me to get it, I have to sign a release. And if I sign a release, I can't trouble you because you have a statutory release and discharge. It seems to me a little bit too much. And I ask that consideration be given to removing it. And the only other point that I raise is in relation to clause 12, page 10. The board shall prudently invest the assets of the scheme And I invite you to read it as it speaks. Don't look behind and try to say, well, this is what it should mean, and answer to the question if it actually achieves what you wish it to mean. So it says, the board shall prudently invest the assets of the schemes with financial institutions that are licensed with the Commission. Now that's the part of it that I have interest in, but I'll continue to read. And place deposits in deposit-taking institution licensed under the Banking Services Act. I have no difficulty with that. That means you have deposits, you must put them in a proper institution licensed under the Banking Services Act, and shall manage the assets of the scheme in a manner consistent with the statement of investment policies and principles pursuant to Section 48. So I go back to the part that I have a difficulty with. The board shall prudently invest the assets of the scheme with financial institutions that are licensed. And I am asking myself the question, is that an excessively limited investment scope? If I am told that I must invest with, does that mean that I am only entitled to access the instruments produced by these licensed institutions? So Ransford Graham Limited is a licensed financial institution by the FSC. It provides brokerage services, it provides other instruments, it sells land, bonds and land when these land things are put together. And I have all of these things, and this pension scheme come and give me $2 billion, and I put them in my products. Could the pension fund see a new hotel being built downtown Kingston and say, I am going to put 200 million in that? Or I couldn't do it because I have to give my money to these licensed people. Now, if that's the intention, so be it. But I don't think it is. You want to invest prudently, but you don't want to give only to Ransford Graham the money. I mean, people like Ransford Graham, assuming that I have a company. So I do have a problem. I would, yes, and I take it as a prophecy. Maybe next week. But the point about it is that, is this too restrictive, or am I being overly concerned? So those are two matters that I ask a consideration to be given, and I will say that the bill is excellent, it is overdue, and I trust that we will continue to increase the safety net for the rest of Jamaicans, so that in due course, the majority, if not all workers, are the beneficiaries of excellent pension schemes as this is proposed to be. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Graham. Senator Morris.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to make my contribution to this debate and to give my fulsome support for the bill. And in doing so, Mr. President, I must say that when I read the bill and I came to the Parliament today and I saw Mrs. Daisy Cook, I felt comfortable because I know that this is an outstanding Jamaican who gives selfless service to our country, and once Daisy is in it, it's good for me. It's good for me. I was there at the Ministry of Labor and Social Security between 2001 and 2007, and she did a lot of work with the National Insurance Fund and National Insurance Scheme. So, you know, I understand the mettle of the woman that we are working with. Mr. President, distinguished and noted political scientist Robert Dahl defines democracy as a continuing responsiveness to the needs of citizens by government. And I start there, Mr. President, because in any democracy, government have to consistently respond to the needs of citizens. And the fact of the matter is that based on the data that has been presented here today by the minister in leading out and Senator Webby in his presentation, we have well over 400,000 individuals, citizens of our country, who are working in the tourism sector and stand to benefit from this bill that we are debating. And Mr. President, for me, pension schemes are extremely important, and it is even more so for workers who are at the lower level of the income scale. You know, Mr. President, I take and make reference to my mother, who was a dressmaker. And during the years that she was active and working, I used to see her signing up her stamp card and making her returns as a self-employed individual to the National Insurance Scheme. And lo and behold, I understood how important that would be to her, because right now the NIS scheme, whilst not adequate to take care of all her needs, is contributing to the pot significantly. And if she never invested in that scheme a couple of years ago, she would not be getting a pension consistently, plus she would not have the opportunity to get the NI Gold initiative, which again, I know that Ms. Coke work on the NI Gold initiative with us in the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. So it's very important. And I want to appeal to every single Jamaican that is working in the hotel industry to make sure that they are making their contribution to the scheme. And for workers who are directly employed in the hotel, make sure that on a monthly basis, they check to ensure that the monies that are deducted from their salary for the scheme, to ensure that it is going where it is supposed to go. Because I have seen and heard, and I've had to deal with a lot of cases when I was at the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, where people collected the workers' funds, and lo and behold, they never repatriated it to the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. And then, you know, when you go to the address where the company was, it's gone. So we have to make sure that we put in place those protective mechanisms. And I really, based on the experience of my mother, Senator Webby, I have to endorse and fully support a pension scheme such as this. The time come. Now, that said, Mr. President, Senator Skeffrey had mentioned about the definition of self-employed tourism worker. And I have some concern because I don't know to what extent the ordinary pan chicken man who lives and works in the tourism areas, the tourism belt, and supply his chicken to tourists on the street, to what extent that pan chicken man can benefit from a scheme such as this. I know that he can contribute directly to the NIS, but I am encouraging every worker, if they can get involved in 2 or 3 pension schemes, do so, because it is going to be redound to your benefit in your retiring years. So I want to find out if those ordinary individuals would be able to make a contribution to a scheme such as this. Now, there's another thing that I am very much concerned specifically as it relates to clause 9(2), which speaks to the purpose in terms of the scheme. And it cites and states who can benefit, and it points to individuals in terms of normal or early retirement or whatever. And then you have the whole issue of illness, and you have the issue of death. I am suggesting, Mr. President, that we have to add another category, and that is for a member who develops a permanent disabling condition whilst attending or at work or leaving work. Because as it is now, this does not cover an individual who develops a permanent disabling condition. And don't tell me that illness would capture it, because illness is totally different from when an accident contributes to a person's disability. A man can be on the job and you slip and you develop a serious spinal injury. You can be going to work and you meet in an accident and it causes a serious disability. That is not an illness. And we have to make a distinction. So I would want us to add another category that would capture a permanent disabling condition. And I also take note, I don't know if further on in the bill, I've been searching for it and I don't know if it missed me, but I know, for example, that with the National Insurance Scheme, it made provision for if you are working and you develop a temporary disability, for some mechanism to be there for you to get some form of compensation. And I would like to see something like that incorporated in a bill of this nature. Another feature that I thought would be useful to a bill of this nature, and again I draw on the experience of the National Insurance Scheme, because it provides some form of health benefit to retired pensioners. The NI Gold allows NIS pensioners to get some form of health benefit. But I don't see a similar provision in this legislation for health benefit for individuals who are working in the industry. And I think that we need to look at that possibility, even if we don't deal with it right now, because I know that the NIS the NI Gold came after years of building up the fund, and the fund was able to take on those additional benefits but it's something that certainly I believe we should contemplate, if not now, but in the not too distant future as the fund becomes established. Mr. President, I am very heartened because I'm a man from St. Mary, and St. Mary is a part of the tourism belt. And so a lot of people in my parish work in Ocherius, work in Trelawney, all over, right? Although I see some parishes want to take and claim parts of St. Mary as theirs. But once you reach from Orokobesa, go right back to White River, all of that stretch is St. Mary. And we own it and we claim it, Senator Webby, and we're not going to cede it to anybody. But, you know, the fact is that all of these workers leave and go to St. Anne and Trelawney to work, and I know that they are going to benefit. And anything that is going to enhance the advancement of our people, anything that is going to contribute to the improved quality of life of our people, I support it wholeheartedly, and I support this bill. May it please you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Morris. Senator Gale.
Mr. President. Mr. President, I want to start by indicating my full support to this piece of legislation. A country's growth depends sometimes on what is done for the working class. And this is a new legislation that has never been seen before anywhere else, that attracts new workers, and it's also going to attract some old workers in the system. But I want to commend and congratulate the team that worked on this piece of legislation. And it's a winner for the workers in the tourism industry. But, President, outside of that, there's a great importance to pension that we, as a society, we don't take care of. As people develop through their lifetime, they have an expectation that at one point in your life, you're bound to retire. And we already know what the state provides is not sufficient. And others may want to supplement it with some form of pension. I'm of the view that whilst workers work, they should be building up an entitlement of a pension when they retire. And it is important that you take control of your retirement planning and make decisions regarding pension. It is often appreciated mostly when you leave, when you retire, when you need it most. That is when you need the supplemental support for health benefits and to pay bills. And Senator Welby made reference to the density in Jamaica in terms of pension coverage. And we would have moved from private pension schemes and to be more aligned now to retirement schemes. But I have a challenge with that because the retirement schemes are only the contributions from the workers and no contribution from an employer. And I'm of the view that for you to properly build on retirement benefits as a worker, part of the total compensation should include a contribution from the employer. And I remember one of the hotel properties that we represent, that it's a multinational, the BITU. When I say we, no, when I say we, it means BITU first. But we sought in our collective labor agreement to pursue a pension arrangement. And they resisted it at first. And they said to us that in no other property anywhere else they have this arrangement. But then they agreed, based on our request, to have the workers contribute to a retirement scheme. And what we did, we further negotiated that on an annual basis, they contribute a lump sum amount to that scheme. What it does is that it allows the workers in the first instance to contribute and to save towards a scheme. And it commits the employer to contribute the lump sum. And on an annual basis, we anticipate that that lump sum payment is going to be increased. But what it does, President, and what is important is that as a country, we must encourage a culture of savings. There are some key strategies that we must promote to improve our pension coverage. Public education and campaigning on this is important. We have to let workers know that it is important to save, and for the employer that it is important to contribute, and what it really means. And we must have a promotion of personal savings and to invest. And to invest. We must also have a provision to incentivize savings as part of the encouragement. And one of the things I will deal with a little later on is that I believe if we pursue this, we have to treat with a radical examination of our employment policies. The tourism worker in Jamaica, Mr. President, is committed to the industry from start to finish. They make valuable contribution to nation building. And they have made Jamaica a world-class choice as a tourist destination. We must commend our tourism workers. But when you talk to a worker in the industry, there are certain fundamentals that they are desirous of, They want housing. And they want housing solutions that are closer to the properties. And so, the chairman of the UDC is here. The UDC have some lands. And some of those lands can be provided. No, man. Because I have some members there who are in the industry. But where the NHT is looking for lands, the UDC can provide some lands and carve out some of these arrangements for hotel workers. Mr. President, also the hotel worker will say to you they want health insurance. They want a fair and reasonable gratuity. They will say to you They want respect and recognition from their employer. They will say to you, Chairman, they will say to you, the opportunity for overseas employment, they are desirous of that. They will say to you also that given the current climate, they want trade union representation. You must ask Senator Brown if his union represents any hotels.
Yes. You do.
Okay. But most importantly, because in all of this, whilst we speak of pension, and let me tell you, they will say to you, they want pensions. They want to save for their retirement. Because one of the unique things about a hotel worker, or workers in the tourism industry, once they enter the industry, they don't leave. Once they enter the industry, they don't leave. And that is why there must be some built-up guaranteed savings for them for their retirement. And this is what this piece of legislation is seeking to do. That's why it's a winner. Key, though, is that we must never lose sight of not just allowing our hotel workers to just pass through the system and just work. There must be some level of upgrading, upskilling, and certification for our hotel workers.
Good point.
This has taken a long journey. It spans administration. And I want to commend the ministers on both sides for the level of advocacy that was put in place to take it to this level for passage. The bill itself, there are some areas that, representation was made. I want to look at the definition for self-employed tourism worker. A person, it means a person who delivers a service to a tourism enterprise on his own behalf and includes a tourism operator. I want you to understand, under the normal scheme of things, we speak of a worker. We are going outside the borders now to include an informal sector. And so it's important that we treat with effectively the registration and the administration of this particular grouping, because we are going against the norm. And I can say this to you, that once these workers understand this, every Jack Mandora, Mandy Mary Sue, who operates in the industry is going to believe that they can participate. And so there has to be some level of clarity in how you treat them. So the registration is important. Because I can tell you something, You have on that hotel property the security guards who are part of the industry and believe that they too should get some of the benefits. Right? Now, the other definition, the worker, the tourism worker, means a person who is employed to a tourism enterprise, whether or not the person is employed for a specific period commencing at approximately the same time in each year or in 2 consecutive years. I don't really like the definition. But I assume the definition is trying to take into consideration the seasonal worker, the contract worker, and the temporary workers. But how it comes across, President, is cause for concern. On page 7, number 6, it says, the commission may investigate the activities of the scheme where it appears to the Commission that, and it outlines some criteria as to A scheme does not meet the funding of solvency requirements prescribed by the Commission. B, the trustees of the scheme have failed to respond within a period of 1 month to a written request for information, or have failed to furnish the information to the satisfaction of the Commission. C, based on information in the possession of the Commission, an investigation should be carried out in the whole or any part of the operations of the scheme. Now, this is where the Commission has been called on to pursue investigations. But normally, President, in the course of things, there is usually a certain action that triggers an investigation. And that's a complaint. And there may be situations where a body, like a trade union, have a complaint against how the scheme is being operated. And by nature of the role of the Commission, it investigates upon complaints. So I'm suggesting that you may want to consider a D that captures the need for complaints to be made to the Commission in order to trigger an investigation. Because I've heard other members spoke. Other members spoke about your collecting the funds from the employee and not paying it over. And let me tell you something, where that is concerned, both the NHT and the NIS, and even Hart Trust, and Senator Morris spoke about the Ministry of Labor. We must take critical actions against employers who take the contribution and don't remit it. Senator Skeffrey, you made reference to that person who is nomadic. The taxi man who may join the scheme and then at a part of the year possibly goes overseas. My understanding is that once you're in the scheme, you're in the scheme. Oh, it's joining. It's joining. Oh, it's joining. Joining. Okay. No, not beating him up. I was supporting it, you know. I was supporting it. Now, on the first schedule, the role of the trustee on page 38. And Senator Skeffrey, again, you spoke about this critical thing against corruption. Now, by law, you know, the trustees play a fundamental role and they have to abide by law. Is short pants and prison work if you go outside the requirements. So, managing the administration and the investment is critical. But I have a little concern about the composition. And I know for the start, it might be difficult, but it says in 2, the board shall consist of not less than 7 members appointed by the minister and shall include not less than 3 representatives from the tourism industry and a minimum of 4 member representatives. And remember now, you have in this case member representatives being the representatives of the workers and also a representative of the self-employed, who is a distinct particular interest group. I want to recommend that in this case, It is not left up to the minister to just appoint, but appoint based on a nomination. Appoint so that the interest group can identify, and it may very well, Senator Webby, be that person with the skill set that is required. But allow the interest group to make their nominations, that persons who are going to deal with their interest. Not left up to the minister only. Now, Chairman, President, the minister has done a great deal for this industry. Excellent. Matter of fact, there's a term used now in the sporting industry, a GOAT, G-O-A-T, greatest of all time. I believe this minister, based on the work that he's doing, he's going towards a GOAT, the greatest of all time. But President, for a minister who has done so great, hard work is rewarded by harder work. And the minister, Mr. President, usually speaks to linkages. I want to make a link that I believe that is very important. So, within this industry, there are permanent workers, there are seasonal workers, depending on the season itself, and when you may need more workers in terms of what was then defined as the winter season. As a trade unionist, however, I have a fundamental concern about the number of contract workers operating in this industry. And let me tell you why. When you work on a fixed term contract, there is sometimes no guarantee for the security of tenure. If this piece of legislation is going to benefit workers in the long run, the security of tenure is important. And so what I'm suggesting, and what I'm strongly encouraging and recommending, is that Jamaica as a country is going to have to look at some national employment policies that protects the working class towards permanency. Now, I'm fully in support of this piece of legislation. I'm encouraging workers and self-employed workers in the industry to join. I'm encouraging them to join. I am encouraging the tour operators and those who are the enterprise to pay over and to commit the payment. But what is important is that we have a responsibility, Mr. President, as a country, to educate our workers in the tourism industry as to the benefits of the objectives of this piece of legislation. May it please you, Mr. President.
Yes, man. Show them how it's done.
Thank you very much, Senator Gale. Senator Fraser Benz.
I'll be much shorter. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I will be making a very I'll be making a very brief presentation because my colleagues, indeed, my colleagues have already spoken to some of the issues of concern. And so I will only touch on those which have not yet been covered in the interest of time. Mr. Deputy Essential. First, Mr. President, this act seeks to establish a defined contribution scheme. And I don't know if it's really a defined contribution scheme. And let me just state that I have a problem with defined contribution pension scheme. I'm always an advocate for a defined benefit. And my colleague here spoke to the experience of two persons who, having invested for years and paid their pension, at the end of the day could only take home $1 in one case, which I know for a fact, and $300. So I'm really against defined contribution because it really is left to the market to determine how much you get. And you could pay a pension every month for 40, 50 years, and then you really do not get anything. So I'm against it. And I do favor defined benefit because at least you know that at the end of the day you're coming home with something set. It seems to me, though, from my understanding, and Minister, through you, Mr. President, my understanding, it seems to me that this is not quite a defined benefit scheme. Even though it is stated as such, it doesn't seem from the reading of it that it's a defined. It perhaps, to take the word of my colleague leader, it perhaps seems to be more like a hybrid kind, not quite defined benefit, not quite defined contribution, because there is at least a minimum that each member is expected to get at the beginning of the pension period. The question I have, though, is what is it that determined the $200,000 that the member will receive at the commencement? Because as I understand it, the pensioner will be paid $200,000 per year once a person becomes pensionable. And I'm not sure if that is a lump sum payment or if that is divided over 12 equal monthly payments. I would like some clarification on that. And secondly, why 200,000? Why not 500,000? Why 200? Why not 300? Why not $1 million? I just need some understanding. It's a minimum, but why 200? Why is 200 chosen? So perhaps you can help me to understand the thinking that went into it. And I see our technical team is here, so perhaps they can guide you so you can help me to understand why that figure was chosen. I want to quickly look at the section that deals with vesting is what, 26? Yes, clause 26. I'm going to have to go back to the front, but let's look at 26 quickly. And it says that the contributions paid on behalf of a member shall immediately vest that member. Is it, through you, Mr. President, Minister, that the intent is unlike other pension scheme where you have to contribute for perhaps 10 years or 5 years to be vested? Is it intended here that at the payment of your first contribution you become vested? Is that the intent? Okay. And if that is the intent, Mr. President, I am in full support of it. I think it is a game changer. One of the issues I've always had with pension schemes is the long period of time you have to wait. In fact, I know of a situation now where a gentleman is just holding on for the 10th year so he can be vested. His condition is so bad. But having worked for 9 years, he simply wants to make it to 10 years so that he can be vested to get his pension. And so I like this, and it is something that I'd want to commend to us. I mean, clearly every situation will determine if it can work, but I think this is where we need to move forward. as a country to ensure that persons are not disadvantaged, or persons don't feel that they have to work X number of years to get the benefits. So it's something I really commend and I really, really like. At clause 18, Mr. President, before I go to clause 18, let's look at the interpretation, page 5. And Senator Gill, I think most persons spoke to self-employed tourism worker. I think that the definition is a little go around, come around, and I wondered whether the draftspersons could help us. It defines a self-employed tourism worker as a person who delivers a service to a tourism enterprise on his own benefit and includes a tourism operator. And then the definition of a tourism operator says it is a person who conducts, manages, or operates a tourism enterprise. So if you look at that definition and then read the definition of self-employed worker, it is saying that a self-employed worker is a person who delivers a service to the tourism enterprise on his own behalf and is a person who includes a person who conducts, manages, or operates a tourism enterprise. I find that to be a little cumbersome, and then when you look at the definition of tourism enterprise in the Tourism Board Act, the Tourist Board Act, it does not help in making this, in defining, doesn't help in the clarification, of the definition. So I wondered, Minister, whether your team, whether the technical team could take a second look and perhaps just make it a little easier to understand. Sorry, what did you hear? Right. Yes. I'm just saying it seems a little clumsy to me. So I don't know if anything can be done to make it easier to understand. Is who? No, man. It says the self-employed person is a person who delivers a service to a tourism enterprise. Yes? No. The tourism enterprise, if you look at the definition of tourism enterprise under Section 2 of the Tourist Board Act, then you see it means like a car, it means any car rental or U-Drive services or any service of rental of motor vehicles as defined by Section 11 of the RTA. It includes sites and other facilities for camping, water sports services, any other service. We get that. And then it goes on, utilized by or offered to tourists and declared by the minister by order to be a tourist enterprise. So the problem I'm having is, in light of that, the addition of and includes a tourism operator and tourism, it seems to me a little redundant, in other words. Because if you're using the definition of tourism enterprise as per the Tourism Act, the Tourist Board Act, then you don't need to add that last section. But I commend it to you and your team. You could look at it and see if there's anything that can be done to make it a little bit more elegant. At board, the complete authority to determine if a self-employed worker can become a member of the scheme. It doesn't state the conditions upon which this decision is going to be made. I presume, Minister, that those conditions will be stated in the regulations. If that is not the intent, I'm going to commend to you that that has to be stated. Because if that is not done, then what it does is that it leaves the decision to be determined arbitrarily by the board. So the board may decide, you know what? Nobody who does taxi business is going to come into the scheme. Or nobody who isn't employed or isn't doing tourist work for 6 months at least is going to be a member of the scheme. You really do not know for sure what are the considerations to which the board is going to address its mind in making this determination as to which self-employed persons will be deemed to be members of the scheme. So I'd want for the regulations to detail those considerations. At clause 18, the contribution, it speaks to the fact that the tourism operator will be required to remit monies collected to the investment manager per subsection 3, periodic contributions. Now, I don't know if the periodic contributions here is speaking about the every month or every quarter or every 6 months. That is not clear. Again, for clarity, I would recommend that it be stated specifically. I know further on in the section it speaks to monthly contribution, but I'm not sure if both are to be read together or if they're separate. And so, Minister, I am asking that you look at section 18, page 14, that says that the tourism operator shall be liable to remit to the investment manager in the manner specified in subsection 3, which is the 3% for the first 3 years and the 5% thereafter, periodic contributions to the scheme. And I'm saying that the term periodic contribution is really not a term of art. It could mean one of many things. And so for clarity, we should state exactly whether it is quarterly, monthly, or biannually. However it is, it should be stated, notwithstanding the provision at subsection 4 that speaks to the monthly contribution that should be made by the tourist operator. Yes? Okay. Clause 21. Clause 21 speaks to where the employer has failed to pay over the monies. And I'm very pleased for all the reasons that have been mentioned by my colleagues that there is a zero tolerance approach to this. But I want to go a little bit further, because what it says at clause 21 is that where the employer has not paid over, then the court shall impose a fine not exceeding $3 million and may order the tourism operator to pay interest on the rate and the expenses of collection of such contributions. I would want this to state very specifically that the tourism operator, in addition to these two things, should pay back the money in full, because my understanding of it is that the court will impose a fine of $3 million and there's interest that is going to be paid, and then there's the money to be paid for collection. But nowhere there is it stated expressly that he is entitled to pay back the money he would have collected. And so I believe that that provision ought to be stated, Minister. At clause 30, page 19, and I believe Senator Skeffrey spoke to this, so I will not be long. You see, I want to get the minister's attention because I'm not talking just generally, I'm being specific to the clause, and I want him to hear me. You got that point, Minister? The point I made earlier regarding the fine and the payment of monies directly at clause 18, clause 21. Having gotten that, clause 30, and Senator Skeffrey mentioned it. But again, because this is such a very different and unusual but very good piece of legislation, we have to ensure that there is no room for interpretation that could be detrimental to the employee. And in the normal course of things, when one is medical board, as they call it, then the benefits that would be due to that person accrues immediately. It is left to interpretation here whether such a person would get their benefit if they have not reached the early retirement age. I know what you have said in terms of the response, but perhaps out of an abundance of caution, you may want to just state expressly that notwithstanding the age limit for early retirement, where one is medical boarded, then such person will be deemed to enter upon early retirement and access all the benefits due therefrom. Immediately, yes. At page 21, clause 34, it speaks to unclaimed funds and subsection 1 and subsection 2. Let me start with subsection 2, because, Minister, I am so very pleased and I am hopeful that there will not be any amendment to this law that states, let me retract. As you are aware, money is held in a commercial bank. If left unclaimed, or if the account is deemed dormant for 7 years, I believe, now, then the government can claim that money and use it for whatever purpose. I am very happy that this provision does not go with that rule, but speaks to a 30-year rule. And I'm very happy about it, Minister. I am hopeful that in the future we do not attempt to amend this provision at 34.2 to allow the government or any entity or anyone to utilize these funds. This provision deals with unclaimed benefits, and so it provides that if the money is not collected, then it stays there, but it cannot go back into the scheme until after 30 years. There is no provision here for the government for it to be deemed dormant or for the government to take, and I'm hoping that it stays that way. But there is a question which I could not answer from my reading of the law, sir. And it has to do with this money that is unclaimed and taken out of the scheme. I reckon it perhaps will go into a special account. And I reckon also that it should be an interest-bearing account. That is not stated. I am only presuming that that is the case. And I would want, again, for better reading of the law, for those things to be stated, whether, if not in the Principal Act, then certainly in the regulations. Whichever, but I'm just asking for clarity so that it is stated. But I see that you agree with that point, Minister. Legal fees, and I won't complain about legal fees, but I will only say, though, that if the contention rests with the board that the legal representative is not fit and proper, and they then take it upon themselves to go to the court for another person to be appointed, I can't see why the beneficiary should be the one to stand the cost. I believe that it is a cost that should come out of the administrative fees or the administrative cost of the scheme and not specific to the beneficiary. If I may just remind you, what it says is that if there is no legal representative, or if there's a legal representative who is appointed that is not deemed fit and proper by the board, again, the board will make these arbitrary decisions, but whatever reason it doesn't deem that person fit and proper, then they can approach the court for an appointment of a legal representative, and the legal fee is then taken out of the benefits that the minor should get. 35, page 22. So my proposal is that the legal fees should not come out of the benefit of the minor, particularly where a legal representative was already appointed. If the board has an issue and the board is going to take it to the court, then it should come out of the general administrative fund, but the beneficiary should not be called upon to bear that cost. At clause 45, and this is not a contention, I am very pleased, extremely pleased about the inclusion and the mandatory inclusion, the mandatory review by the actuary. You see, Mr. President, I have been fortunate or unfortunate to sit on a board that manages funds. And the unfortunate thing is that I wish the prosperity don't reach me. But the fortunate or unfortunate thing is that the required review was not being undertaken for several years, to the point where there was simply no money left. And we hear this talk, and even outside of that entity, Senator Brown, we've heard of other government entities where that is not being done. And so I am very, very pleased that we have stated that there should be an actual review every 3 years. And I'm hoping that is not just the letter of the law, but that we give effect to this and ensure that the review does take place. At page 31, clause 54, it speaks to the benefits of the scheme and that it should not be assigned or charged. Clause 54. What I'm about to say, I'm not saying it for the first time. I have said it before, I think, when we were looking at the pension for the public service. I spoke about it. You know, Senator Crawford mentioned it in a different way. I don't believe that we should be so rigid in not allowing the pension benefit to be used as security. Across the world, based on my reading, this is something that is done. So if you want to buy a house, if you want to do an investment, something, then your pension should be able to be used as collateral. I'm not asking for an amendment to be made now. I'm just having a discussion, Minister, right? It is done. The literature shows that. And I'm saying that perhaps we need to consider how it is done. We need to consider if there's a possibility that it can be so that persons can actually use their pension as security for investment or to buy a house or something. So it's something that I'm throwing it out for future discussion that we can have as we move forward. As I said earlier, when I started, Mr. President, this is not a defined benefit or a defined contribution in straitjacket. To me, it's a hybrid. And I think creative minds will cause us, as we progress, to find different ways of solving some of the issues that we have. And that is just something that I am throwing out. And I'm winding down. Clause 62 speaks to regulations. And I'm going to just say one thing on this. No man, it's 5 minutes. I'll say one thing on this, Minister. Mr. President, can I get some protection from Senator Braham?
And the language is using?
I'm going to report it today, me, I don't know.
No, not certified.
But, Minister, on a very serious note, though, I find that we have not been, successive governments have not been very quick to deal with regulations. We have not performed that side of our duty with alacrity. And so I am asking us, there's so much of this legislation that depends on the regulations coming to the House, coming to the Parliament. And so I am asking Mr. Minister that we move quickly to ensure that the regulations are tabled, because you can't really give effect to this bill without the regulations, which really details some of the operational aspect of it. And I noticed, which is quite unusual for such a new bill, but there's no review clause. I don't know if it was intended or what. But I'm recommending that a provision be made for review, particularly given the newness of this, given the groundbreaking nature that it takes on, that perhaps within the next 5 years, that there's a review in 5 years, so we can look to see how it's working, if it's working at all, or what we need to tweak. So I'm going to recommend that a review clause be inserted. The first schedule, my colleagues already spoke to section 2 that talks about the composition of the board and that there's no representative from the workers. I will not belabor that point because I think it is well taken that you have to have a representative from the workers themselves, albeit it speaks in tourism industry. But the tourism industry could possibly mean just the people who own the hotel. So I don't need to speak more on that. I think it speaks for itself. The period clause, section 6 that speaks to the tenure of the office, it says 3 years. I believe, again, that given the nature, though there can be reappointment, given the nature of what the trustees are expected to do, that 3 years is not a reasonable time. Again, I would recommend maybe 5 years, 7 years, but 3 years I think can be increased. Or more, yeah, but certainly minimum 5 years, I would recommend. And the other thing, 2 more points I want to make about the composition. It doesn't state the skill set, but I would recommend that, as I've seen in other pieces of legislation, that when you're talking about the number of persons the minister should, that it may be useful for some guidelines, and it is normally done in the principal act, in the schedule, that it states the skill set that is required in the composition of the board. And finally, the issue of remuneration. At section 12, it says that there shall be, for the scheme, there shall be paid from the scheme to the chairperson and the other trustees such remuneration, whether by honorarium, salary, or fees, and such allowances as the minister with responsibility for the public service may determine. Not a very unusual provision, but again, I believe given the role of function and the responsibility and the liability of trustees, that it should not just be left like this, but that they should be really remunerated for the work they have done. And Mr. President, in winding down, let me just say that the best pieces of legislation in my mind are shelved away, and persons oftentimes don't know about it until trouble takes them. This is a phenomenal piece of legislation, and all my colleagues have given credit to both Minister McNeil and Minister Bartlett. But even more than that, what is required is a public education campaign. And when I say that, I mean we have to go into the craft markets. We spoke about the Tourism Linkages Council. It's beyond that. We have to ensure that persons understand. I spoke about the need for the regulations. We need to get the regulations quickly and go into these different sectors and talk with persons so they understand the basis upon which they will be, that they can be a part of the scheme, what is required of them, what are the benefits. I think some of these things need to be worked out. The issue of the pension itself, I had to look 2 or 3 times to fully understand how the $200,000 is going to be. Is it going to be a one-off payment, a lump sum? So all of these things, I believe, are things that we have to take to the people and talk with them so they fully understand. And if we can get their buy-in, Mr. President, if we can get their buy-in, then I believe that this is going to be for the benefit of all Jamaicans. We all know about the benefit of tourism, but I think this is only going to make it bigger and better. I've always said that entertainment is a way forward, but this is going to be an added asset to all our workers, but will become dead asset if people do not know about it and if we do not get all stakeholders on board. And with that, Mr. President, I fully support this bill.
Thank you, Senator Fraser-Binns. Senator Scott Motley. Oh. Senator Longmore.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Motley, for yielding to my cause. Admittedly, I am just a little bit discombobulated. I just got some very unfortunate news about a friend who had a miscarriage at 7 months old. I was at her baby shower last week, Saturday, so it's, and as I rise, it relates to this in a very far-fetched way, but a little bit relevant, if I may say that. First, let me say thank you to the technical team and to the drafters of this very important act. I think the workers of Jamaica are the builders of Jamaica, and I think every effort to see to their longevity and their hopeful prosperity is one that we all support. And I think that this is indeed a bipartisan effort led by bipartisan ministers, and so I think we should celebrate it in a bipartisan manner. Throughout the bill, I see where there is effort to encourage accountability, enforceability, fairness, transparency, and overall a general proper management of the scheme. We have spoken with respect to the membership, and I will be brief, towards the membership of eligibility, specifically at clause 15. And at this point, I would just want to recognize the fact that in our last social and economic survey, 2018, it was demonstrated that almost 2/3 of the workers who are directly employed in the tourism industry are women. And so, as a champion for women's issues and women's rights, women's equal opportunity, I am significantly grateful that this clause is one that, this act, is one that women within the tourism industry in particular are able to take advantage of. And especially at a time in life when the economic virtues and the economic need of a woman is imperative in her latter years, and such financial security does not tend to be forthcoming. It is celebrated in my mind that this will see to a significant portion of our female workers being able to access latter year care. In similar vein, I am also of the concern, as most of our previous presenters, as to how far does these definition of tourist worker and tourist enterprise, self-employed tourism worker actually extend. My concern being primarily for especially agricultural workers and farmers who tend to labor for decades, may supply stuff in the food chains, may supply directly to some of these very hotspot tourist areas, but they're not recognized as beneficiaries of an act such as this. And so I wonder about that entity to say many of our farmers, many of our rural workers who indirectly are affiliated with the tourist industry, how may they benefit, and if there is an opening for them to benefit. With respect to the definition of tourism, tourist enterprise and self-employed tourist worker, I think there may be an avenue for such persons, but that I would like some clarity on. With respect to, I share Senator Morris's concern with respect to clauses 9 and 22 also, Senator Morris, for the inclusion of a disability provision in terms of being able to be recognized as beneficiaries and payouts in terms of permanent disability occurring. I specifically also wondered in terms of the insurance benefit for members of the scheme. I don't see any provisions for a life insurance or health benefit insurance. I am a significant advocate for persons trying to get insurance and be clear on insurance for unforeseen events. And so in our latter years, especially after years of labor in a particular industry where you might be exposed to all sorts of chemicals, all sorts of hazardous exposure, what might be the subsequent benefit that you might be able to get through this scheme, if any. With respect to, I think it was Senator Skeffrey about his traveling taxi driver. I don't know if clauses 27 relates to it in terms of the transfer, even overseas, of the pension plan and scheme, where it is actually transferable and provisions have been made that the schemes could be linked with similar schemes overseas. And so that taxi operator who may do 6 months in Jamaica and another 6 months overseas, maybe there is a possibility for the benefits to be transferred. That's clauses 27 and 28. And lastly, with respect to Minister Bartlett, on May 24th, 2019, stated, these pensioners will receive a minimum pension of $200,000 per year. This pension plan embraces everyone in the sector, whether he be or she be red cap, front desk worker, craft trader, housekeeper, craftsman, or any other category of worker in the industry, including those who are self-employed. I think, Senator Binns, that 200,000 mark is probably an actuarial calculation based on the contribution, the minimum contribution that could be made. And that is a minimum benefit. So I don't think it's just a figure that was kind of pulled out of the air. Yeah. Right? And so, as I stated before, or well, I didn't, I rise to be in support of this act, and I rise to commend the crafters of this act. I thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Senator Longworth. Senator Scott Motley.
Mr. President, I want to commend a number of persons. I want to commend the technical team, because this is a lot of work. When I was researching the matter, I couldn't find any precedent. Normally you can go and find what jurisdiction it has been modeled on. In this case, it just was not possible. And I think that sometimes we forget the persons who are behind the legislation and the tremendous amount of work that they put in it. And I want to say to them, it's obvious here. In commending both ministers and saying that this is really the way that it ought to be, that where one finds that something is important or of significance, that the partisanship must be left outside the door. I commend both ministers, and I commend in particular, at this stage, Minister Bartlett's decision to keep the same team in place that Minister Wickham McNeil had. It is why this afternoon we are honored by the presence of Mrs. Daisy Coke, the first female actuary in Jamaica. It might be the only occasion that I will have to say what deep admiration and regard I have for her, not just for her competence in our field, her demonstrated ability, but her wicked sense of humor. Mr. President, I have not seen in recent times this kind of level of contribution to a debate and the seriousness with which it has been approached. And so most of the points that I would have liked to have brought to your attention and to the attention of the House has already been dealt with. I make one appeal in this context, though. Legislation should be for the persons who it's meant to benefit. And so one of the things that I would ask is that the definition of tourism worker be revisited. And I'm going to read it for emphasis. It says tourism worker means a person who is employed to a tourism enterprise, whether or not the person is employed for a specific period, commencing at approximately the same time in each year or in 2 consecutive years. If I were a tourism worker, I would have to pay a consultation fee and go to an attorney to tell me exactly where I fall. And I would just like it to be simplified so that when people are hearing about this bill, as they will,
Does it apply to them?
they can determine whether or not it applies to them immediately.
Singular.
The other point that I want to make is in relation to section 15. I make it clear that I'm not objecting to the implications, and I am looking particularly at Mrs. Coke, but that I want an understanding and appreciation of what it means. Because in the same way as Senator Skeffrey raised some aspect of whether the ordinarily resident period in Jamaica ought to be adopted for the purposes of this legislation, I ask the question, was it intended that this scheme applied to Jamaicans only? Or is it a broad scheme which embraces everybody who works in the tourism industry? Because there was an objection made as to the employment of persons in the entertainment industry, and pointing out that jobs which can be filled quite adequately by Jamaicans are sometimes given to, I think it was Senator Sinclair who says, when you go there it's kind of undercover, so you don't know. In this, by virtue of this section, it legitimizes, the possibility of somebody who is not a Jamaican worker, who has lived here continuously for upwards of 6 months, or not less than 6 months, to be able to become a part of this pension fund. I'm not saying that this should not be so, but I'm saying that when we legislate it, we must be clear as to the policy behind it, to see if that was in fact our intention. If that was not our intention, then I suggest that we take a second look at it. Mr. President, I join with my colleagues in the concerns about the section 35 from two perspectives. If it is that, in the opinion of the board, the legal representative is unfit, I think it's too subjective. Now, I do know that we have a fit and proper test for persons, for trustees, and in certain other areas, you have to pass this fit and proper test. The wording of this does not give me the impression that that was what was contemplated. And as I was reflecting on it, I wanted to think, wonder if you could have somebody who, because Senator Crawford wears locks, could say, not him. Yeah. We should be. No, you want a better example? meaning that we must not leave it too open to somebody's own sort of perception. You know, that's not the point of this. And also to say that this fund is not going to, at the end of the day, make you a millionaire. We know that. And so the question of the application to court being paid for by the minor, I remember that we have, this society has a duty to protect minors. And we have put in place many pieces of legislation devised for that purpose. This section, I think, exposes the minor, because by the time you finish with the legal fees, there will be no money left. Let's just be open and fair. If you're talking about starting out at 200,000 as your benefit, you go to Supreme Court and you have to bring an action like that. Senator Sinclair, you know. Indeed. So that I want to really say that I am pleased with this. I want to make one last point. When I looked at the tourism linkages network initiative, and I heard the aspirational statement of the minister that he wanted to see it all go everywhere, that everybody was going to be a part of this industry, and that as a matter of fact he was going to now turn to community tourism, I am concerned about exactly how this is going to work. And sometimes you have great ideas, great policies, and in the implementation of it, you find that there are obstacles which you did not anticipate. Perhaps in the future, the way to deal with situations like this is to really just have a national scheme that everybody contributes to, much like what happens in Trinidad and Tobago, and very similar to what happens in Barbados. Because I can just imagine that as time goes along, you wouldn't even know who falls in this category. And it is important that tourism, one of the greatest contributors to our economy, be widened and extended from highways to byways in the country, and can't wait for it to expand on the south coast, and in particular Clarendon, every which way, Airbnbs and so on. I want it to be expanded, but I have to say that, you know, Senator Webby, that we need to take a closer look at some of the things that we are trying to,
You're right, because there's no legislation for Airbnb.
to achieve. Yes, and I make this point within the context of saying that tourism enterprises and tourism operations are required to be registered under the Tourist Board Act. When you go beyond that, when you check your list of registration and you can monitor the payments and the contributions and so on from that, how then do you bring everybody else into it? Because the employers, even though they might speak about it, they are not willing contributors. We know that. And we also know that there are many of them who even collect the contributions but do not pay them over. So we have to we have to take a close look at things like this if we want an act that really functions, and this one should really be able to function. So, Mr. President, I won't delay these proceedings any longer. I simply say again, this is how the Senate should function. Senator Graham.
No point of order. No point of order.
With both sides working together to create legislation which can be tested in court and which truly benefits the people of this country, if it pleases you.
And done report today. That was a good day.
Thank you, Senator Motley. Minister? No. Senator Brown.
Mr. President, I'm not even moving the chair behind me.
Night watchman and they're going to stay long.
Let me start by saying, Mr. President, that this is a matter affecting the workers of Jamaica, and in particular, tourism workers. And as a union man all my life, I must support this bill. And in recognizing that this bill would not be possible without the Tourism Enhancement Fund, as Clause 10 pointed out, $1 billion is to be provided. But the TEF, like the Chase Fund, like the National Health Fund, and like so many other funds that have been created to advance and lift our people progressively from poverty. That TEF fund, long before you stole poverty to prosperity from Dayton Campbell, long before that, we were moving progressively to lift our people up. But the TEF fund was established as part of the Tourism Sustainable master plan developed by Sophie leaving now, developed by then Minister of Tourism Portia Simpson Miller, worked on along the way by former Tourism Minister Luna Samba, carried forward by Ed Bartlett, and significantly by, no, I'm one PNP powerful together. Yeah, so you don't have to ask questions about that. So carried on by Ed Bartlett, Wickham McNeil, back to Ed Bartlett. So I agree this has been a thing, but it could not have been possible, Senator Webby, without the foresight to establish the TEF. Because that TEF fund came under criticism by others, who felt we were pushing the thing too far and we should not set up that fund. But it is that fund today that provides $1 billion for this pension thing, or else it couldn't get off the ground. So we need to just recognize that's where it starts. And I want to appreciate the work in the last term of the PNP government by Dr. McNeil, and Damien Senator Crawford spoke to it. Not only do we talk and put it in manifesto, we put the mechanism in place, and we set up the team to get where we are today, so that you can go and know the regulation. And in this regard, I too want to personally thank for her role the Honorable Daisy Cook, for the tremendous work she did. And I can say it here, Senator Scott Motley, that she don't sleep.
I know that.
And she doesn't sleep. So I know many nights she would have been working on this. And she has been a friend of the pension schemes in this country for many, many years. And Senator Webby, I hope one day you will join me, as I hope Senator Gale will join me, in getting moved for debate in the Senate. A motion, notice of which was given on Friday, 2nd December 2016. It's on number 4 on the order paper of motion. And let me read for the record what that motion moved by Senator Brown, that's me? Yeah, moved by myself. What it says. Whereas after 50 years of existence of the NIS scheme, less than 50% of the persons eligible for membership do participate in that scheme. And whereas the word you used today, the statistics, Senator Webby, show that less than 15% of the Jamaican population are members of a bona fide pension scheme. And whereas not only do contribution to pension schemes guarantee an income at retirement, but such contribution allow for investment in national development and economic growth. And whereas it is essential that the saving rate in our country be improved if higher levels of economic growth are to be achieved, be it resolved that the Senate establish a select committee to review and propose ways and means to encourage greater participation of the population in pension schemes and retirement planning. But the government side doesn't think that this is worthy of a debate. I urge you to help me to get the House leader to put this on the agenda, so that we don't only look about pension for tourism workers. And by the way, this pension scheme could overgrow the NIS scheme because of the potential number of people for it. That's what Wickham McNeil was working towards, and Bartlett has agreed to carry on. So that tells us that while we have to look at the experience of the NIS scheme to see what pitfall we may encounter here. We know, for example, that the NIS scheme is now in deficit. We are paying out more than we are collecting. We know that a lot of the self-employed who we want to attract to it have chosen not to be in it. And that's not good for the country, and we need to incentivize it. So I really urge the Senate to come to this debate, Mr. President, that I have had on the motion order paper from almost 3 years. I beg us, Senator Charles, let us debate this before December. Don't make it a 3-year. Because people say, oh, the opposition don't put proposals. We don't put ideas out there. But when we put them for discussion, for joint resolution, the government refused to debate it. So I urge you to pick up and debate this. Mr. President, most of the pension schemes in the country are the result of trade union representation. People like you, Shearer, Michael Manley, Carlisle Dunkley, Upton Cable, who fought earlier for pension scheme. Those are mainly the schemes surviving today. And as Senator Brahma said, stratagems have been used to deny workers benefits like pension schemes. And it can't be good for the country because these companies are operating in a way that does not look after the long-term interests. So, President, in terms of the scheme, pension scheme, much has been said about the role of the trustees and the need for worker representative to be part of the legislation. Let me tell you why. The trustees are key to protecting the assets of the scheme. Mr. President, today the Gleaner reported a story, the headline of which was Court Blocks Russell Maneuver in Pension Surplus Case. And what that tells you that companies, well certainly in Russell case, was looking to take a big chunk of the $3.5 or $3.7 billion of pension surplus. Thankfully, the court ruled that the trustees' recommendation should be key. But management tried to manipulate trustees' membership. And in that way, could put trustee there that sell out, is that accepted? Sell out the work, the beneficiary's interest. I know them don't like sellouts. I'm not talking about fishermen, I'm talking about pension beneficiaries. So it's important that we get the trustee case right. We know the famous Air Jamaica case, Senator Ronnie, and there are other cases where the court had to intervene to protect the beneficiary because sponsors seek to take as much out of it for themselves. So I raise those issues in support of the excellent presentation on both sides. But I was impressed in how the members on this side went through clause by clause. I don't need to do that today. Went through clause. You as a neophyte don't understand when you say both sides. So I can understand you. As a neophyte, you don't understand what is meant by both. But Mr. President, I want to say two other things. As we look at the who can benefit, I think Senator Langmore raised the question of farmers. I was in South St. Elizabeth this week. Doesn't matter why I was there. But the farmer said to me, look at our fields. We supply tourism. We supply the workers in tourism and we supply the hotels. One farmer, 500 heads of lettuce, 5,000 heads of lettuce. No water. And there's a charge you in charge of water. Do something for them. So I want you to do something for them. Get water to them so the crop, what has been announced is not enough. But they've asked me to ask you to do something for the farmers in southern St. Elizabeth who are suffering from this drought. So I haven't done that. Last thing I want to say, Mr. President, because I hope that all the suggestions that have been made thus far would give you a chance to think over it over the weekend and we come back another day and go through committee. Because a lot of suggestions have been made today. It will be fool all of us just to rush in and ignore the suggestions made. And against that background, I just want to say to Senator Sinclair, Senator, sitting in this chamber right now is at least 3 members of the National Housing Trust Board in the last term. At least 3. I want to identify them. Suffice it to say, the things you are finding shovel-ready now was because that board, which included Senator Gale and myself, I want to identify the third person, were busily working to put them in place. So when you said that nothing was happening, just understand me. Just understand, it is a National Housing Trust. And when you say what you said, it appears that the staff of the National Housing Trust sat down. Maybe you don't understand that the procurement rules, maybe it is the NHT, you don't understand. Maybe you don't understand the procurement rules and those other issues. But I can tell you the 3 members of the NHT board was monitoring and working hard. I could tell you about a scheme in Bounty Hall, Trelawney, which includes sugar workers and tourism workers, the first step scheme. Work was being done. I don't think Cobb and Gale was sitting idly in those board meetings, and the other people weren't. So I just want to raise it because sometime in trying to score 3 points, we attack the work. No, it's cheap. It wasn't nothing expensive that time. But it's about attacking the work of the agents, the public bodies, and the staff and what they're doing. Of course, I too would have wanted them to move faster, but the reality is work was being done, and to honor the people.
Mr. President, I just need to clarify for you, because the ones that I spoke about does not relate to NHT, Senator Brown. Doesn't relate to NHT. So I don't know why you're seeking, every time you come here, you seek to make false claims and to claim things onto yourself. So it's misleading the House.
Senator Brown, continue, please.
Thank you, sir. Another spurious objection. Thank you. So, Mr. President, I hope with this, no, I've dealt with that. I've dispatched that. I hope, Mr. President, that we will now move, and I hear that they're going, Senator Charles said they're going to go and retreat to the regulations, because the scheme won't work without the regulations. I hope that the team working on the regulations will do it as quickly as possible. It will come back to us, because we want this to be implemented for the workers. But as my colleagues have said, the Road Traffic Act, we were told, I can remember the speech. Make your point about that 1,000 times you want. The Disabilities Act, Road Traffic Act, the regulations were to follow. Let not these regulations fall in the scheme. I have every confidence that the Honorable Daisy Cook, sleepless nights she will lead and bring us the regulations quickly. And for that, and for the vision in setting up the TEF, which allow for this pension scheme, I give thanks to those who did the work. May it please you, Mr. President. It must be the shortest speech, but time to go.
Mr. President, today we have heard, I believe, from almost everyone on this issue, and it demonstrates perhaps the critical importance of this bill to the country. Let me start, Mr. President, by thanking my colleagues for their...
Sorry, Senator Charles, is it your intention to go to committee today?
Senator Braham is asking us to go to committee, but no, I think that there are a number of issues that have been raised, President, and some of the issues I believe will be best attended to by giving the technical team and the ministry sufficient time to address their minds to it.
So why don't you wait until that occasion to do your closing?
Well, I was going to do so. I intended to do so. But I was just, well, perhaps I can't then make this statement. You're correct. Because I was just going to refer to an issue. But you're correct, President. And I'm guided by you and your wisdom. I was just taking the time to commend, actually, the detail and what I found to be the intricate manner in which my colleagues addressed this bill. And just to say, we'll treat with that at the next occasion when we will close the debate, and then at that time, colleagues move to committee stage.
Okay, so the question is proposed by the learned minister, is that the debate on the Tourism Workers' Pension Act be suspended for a date to be fixed. Those in favor? Against? And you would note that the debate has been completed. It is for the minister's closing and the bill to be sent to committee.
Just a point of clarification. Today we took announcement, and I'd ask some questions then. I've been tracking my phone to see if the first annual report of the Integrity Commission has been posted. At this point, it hasn't been posted. Normally, we would get an electronic list of matters laid on the table today, and I'm wondering what is happening. I'd love to get a hard copy of the three that is there, but certainly, President, I'd love to know why we're not getting
my understanding is that it should have been done. If it's not, maybe you speak to the clerk and get a hard copy. Eh?
It's not up to date because I'm seeing an email that says Integrity Commission report on my... Check, Senator Brown.
Yes, it's up, Senator Brown.
4:23, just as after I got up. It just came in. So
the Senate now stands adjourned. Thank you.
There's a long-distance relay that's still on. Many have taken it this far, each leg as important as the next, each challenge faced with determination. Now it's your turn to take the baton. People living with HIV and AIDS and those who are vulnerable need your commitment. It stands in the way of a better quality of life for all of us.